Now, when I reflect on my experience at UVA, I hold in tension a deep sense of admiration for the university, and at the same time I can restrain my enthusiasm for characteristics of the school that have surfaced during my time on the faculty. I want to be very clear. I am grateful to the university for a paycheck, for the freedom to do research on topics that I wanted to explore, to teach a subject that I find interesting and difficult, to connect with students, some of whom have become my friends, even to the extraordinary privilege of living on the lawn for 10 years. To use a biblical illustration, my cup runneth over. I want to recount 5 changes I've observed that I admire about this institution, or I could add more. The most notable change during my time is the co-ed character of the College of Arts and Sciences. When I joined the faculty, all the students in the college were men. When the college admitted women, the year was 1970. It did not do so in token fashion. In 2 years, the college was thoroughly integrated, male and female. And the move to coeducation was accomplished with remarkable skill by the administration. One result has been to improve the academic stature and classroom rigor in the college. And like every professor I know in the college, I'm glad that a son of the university now can be someone's daughter. Another change is the skin color of the university community. When I arrived, almost all the students at Mr. Jefferson's University were white. I don't know the statistics, but I suspect the undergraduate population is now almost 25% non-white. The number of African American students and students of Asian background is evident if you attend a class or simply walk around grounds. Another change is the quality of the students and the academic intensity of some majors. UVA has always attracted exceptionally talented students, and it still does, but there are more of them. No offense to those who graduated in the College of Arts and Sciences, but it is a better school than it was in the late 1960s. Economics, where I hang my hat, is now the largest major in the college. Undergraduate students who do well in my department know more economics than students who earned a master's degree in the 60s and 70s. Another change, and this is number 4 on my list, is athletics at UVA. I'm not a big sports fan, but I am struck by the change in the status of Virginia sports teams during my time on the faculty, where a national championship is expected every year in at least one sport. Now, I want to add a footnote to number 4. Having taught hundreds, literally hundreds of varsity athletes, I have never had a coach in any sport ask me to do anything that was academically unethical. Athletics at the University of Virginia is like what President Reagan called a shining city on a hill, especially compared to the scurrilous conduct of athletics in a town south of here called Chapel Hill. The last I shall mention is the increasing interest in religious observance among students, especially evangelical Christianity, but also Judaism, and more recently Islam. Within the Christian sphere, UVA was a wasteland in the late 60s when I arrived. Today, the best estimate we have is there are about 1,400 undergraduate students involved in Christian fellowships on grounds, either attending a large group or small group Bible studies. When I arrived, there was one group of Christian students that I knew of, and it was so small it could meet around a table. Now, you will never read about this spiritual awakening in a UVA or Alumni Association publication, because I suspect it's a source of embarrassment to some members of the faculty and administration. But I, for one, am glad that it's no longer peculiar to be spiritually observant at UVA. Now, I want to switch gears and move from the changes I have admired to changes that trouble me. When the Apostle John was exiled on the Isle of Patmos, he wrote the book of Revelation, the last book in the Christian Bible. And in that book, John explains why Jesus praised the church in Ephesus for having many wonderful qualities. But after these words of praise, the Apostle John records these ominous and memorable words. This one thing I hold against you. Now, because I have such affection for the university, I'm reminded of these words because there are some characteristics of UVA that I hold against her. And I'm going to mention 4, and I'm going to hold the most troubling to the last. Now, the first one is simply, and I'll admit it, curmudgeon. So I'm going to beg your indulgence here. I witnessed firsthand the decline and fall of the coat and tie tradition. When I was a young pup on the faculty, all the students in the college wore a coat and tie. When I first arrived and I was shelving books in my Rouse Hall basement office, a young man showed up at the door. He was wearing a sport coat, an Oxford cloth shirt, a rep tie, and cordovan shoes. And being new to town, I assumed I was being visited by an insurance salesman. It was a student. Jim Wooten was his name. I still remember Jim. Now, the demise of the coat and tie tradition has its regrettable side. I continue to believe in the theory that if you constrain the flow of blood and air in the circulation of a man's neck, he will behave in a more civilized fashion. I have never heard of a mugger wearing a coat and tie. Very few bank robbers do. And I have never taught a class at UVA without wearing a coat and tie. I said that was curmudgeon. I want to go to number 2 on my list of this I hold against you, and I am sad to see the weakening of the honor system. It is not as vital as it once was. Honor is a student-run system, as all of you I suspect know, and if it's not what it once was, its primary blame lies with the students. Many of my students today claim they would never lie, cheat, or steal, and I believe them. But they tell me that they would not report a student who did. Now, why is that? Some tell me that reporting an honor violation would be tattling, and nobody likes a snitch. Some tell me that they believe reporting an honor violation would be like imposing their values upon someone else. Now, think about that for a moment. One wonders if someone punched them in the face. Would they not report this to the authorities because this would involve imposing their values upon someone who enjoyed punching people in the face? Now, regarding honor, I'm not talking about demise. Most of us on the faculty still take a student's word. And because I've taught so many students, I often encounter students who are ill or under the weather and they want to be excused from a test. And they assure me that they will get a notice from the doctor or from student health. And I remind them that they need not do this at the University of Virginia because I take a student's word. Often a student will look at me in this situation and it is as if a light goes on. Oh, that's what the honor system means. I'm considered trustworthy, worthy of Mr. Elzinga's trust. For number 3, let me start with an impression of the university that has been a constant during my time on the faculty. And that is the University of Virginia attracts students who want to be at UVA. And this sentiment goes back many years to the eloquent and memorable words of James Hay Jr. And I'll quote the tail end of them. Some of you know this by heart. Remembering the purple shadows of the lawn, the majesty of the colonnades, and the dream of your youth, you may say in reverence and thankfulness, I have won the honors of honor and graduated from Virginia. Now note the word thankfulness in what Mr. Hay wrote. He expressed gratitude for being able to attend the university. Several years ago, a young woman who was a student at UVA blogged about her time on grounds, and then she continued to blog about her life. And this is how she revised Mr. Hay's words in describing her graduation from UVA. She wrote, "Thank you, God, for giving me the chance to go to UVA, for allowing me to wear the honors of honor." Now fast forward, that was in 2011. Fast forward to where some lawn residents put FUCK UVA on their lawn room doors. even on the door of the Gus Blagden room, the so-called good guy room. To have such coarse language coming from the purported elite of the fourth-year class is a change at UVA that, at least at a minimum, is notable, if not to be regretted. There's no hint of thankfulness for wearing the honors of honor when one sees a sexual expletive to describe the institution. And if students are moving from grateful to ingrate, this too is a change for which I can restrain my enthusiasm. Ironically, if not sadly, the university guides may be a reflection of this change in how students perceive the university. When my wife Terry and I were lawn residents, the years were 1992 to 2003, we got to know many of the university guides. We lived in Pavilion 4, as some of you may remember, the guides hang out in Pavilion 8. And they were a group of students who loved UVA. They were ambassadors for the school. The word on the street is that one can now take a tour of the lawn, and the university guide may be so negative about the school, about its heritage, about its founder, that those on the tour have wondered, why did the student decide to go here if it's so bad, if the founder is such a terrible person? Now, my speech teacher at Kalamazoo College told me it was especially important when I gave a talk to let the audience know when I was coming near the end. I didn't hear her say this to any other student in the class, so I asked her why. And she said, Kenny, I was called Kenny at Kalamazoo College, she said, Kenny, this will revive hope among your audience. So I'm near the end of my talk. But before I conclude, this is number 4 on my list of what I wish was otherwise at the university. And that's the strength of the cancel culture at UVA. Many students and faculty do not feel free to express their views. At a university, mind you. How many is impossible to tell, because people who are sufficiently cowed will, as one of my colleagues put it, keep their head down. The student council mounts an attack on Christian groups, claiming that their views on human sexuality means they should not be allowed to meet on grounds, even though Mr. Jefferson intended a room in the rotunda to be set aside for discussion of religious views. The Cavalier Daily writes an editorial claiming that a speech by the former Vice President of the United States should not be allowed to be given on grounds because his speech, the speech that has not yet been given, mind you, will be a form of violence. A medical student questions the concept of microaggression at a talk on microaggression and is dismissed from the university for doing so. A former student of mine, Emma Camp, who does not identify as a conservative or being religious, writes an op-ed for the New York Times describing how students do not feel free to express their views at the university for fear of being canceled. She's then criticized on social media for expressing this view. Had Emma Camp written an op-ed piece in the New York Times on a dozen other topics, would she not be recognized and applauded by the UVA communications machine? As far as I can tell, no mention is made of Emma Camp's piece in UVA Today. And to be really candid, I'm not going to hold my breath that it'll get a mention in the UVA Alumni Magazine. A colleague of mine tried to help me understand this, and he said, Ken, UVA Today and the Alumni Magazine don't really do journalism, they do advertising. A dean once asked me why students at UVA would be fearful of expressing their views. Why, he asked me. And I suggested performing what Germans call a Gedanken experiment, a thought experiment. Imagine a female student at UVA who is a devout Roman Catholic. She holds to the view of her church on abortion. She would like to have a forum in which various views of abortion could be discussed, including her own. She goes to the Women's Center and asks if the center would be willing to sponsor and promote such a forum. Would she be welcome? To ask the question is to answer it. Or as another thought experiment, imagine a student from California who believes affirmative action is wrong. Either wrong as a matter of constitutional interpretation or wrong because affirmative action may have consequences different from its intentions. This student, incidentally, would be with the majority of California voters who voted down Prop 16 in her state. And I'm told the majority of voters who are black voted against the government's use of affirmative action. So here's the thought experiment. Would she feel free to make her views on affirmative action known if she were applying for a position as a resident advisor in a dorm? Or to intern inside a university that expects or requires a DEI statement on most every application? To ask the question is to answer it. I believe that many employees at UVA, faculty and administration, believe in free speech. But all this means is they welcome what the British would call the loyal opposition. That is, people who do not quite agree with them, but they're close. The loyal opposition is okay because they don't really control what happens anyway. I fear that few students at UVA understand that the First Amendment does not just protect the thoughts of people like them, but it is designed to protect the people at the margin of the social and political and religious culture. I wonder if some students who think they're speaking truth to power do not realize that what they're doing is virtue signaling. If you believe in free speech, if you really believe in it, you do not do so because you think dissenters should be tolerated. You believe they have a right to be heard. Some years ago, I had the good fortune to be a visiting scholar at the University of Chicago, and I met Harry Calvin, a beloved professor in the law school. Calvin understood that freedom of speech belongs to the inarticulate and the angry, as well as the loyal and respectful opposition. He didn't think that crackpots and subversives and extremists deserve First Amendment protection because they're harmless. He thought they deserved protection because they may have something to say that ought to be heard in a democratic society. I'm a born-again Christian. I subscribe to 2 magazines that are very hostile to the Christian faith. I do not believe they deserve First Amendment protection out of a sense of noblesse oblige. I want to read what they have to say. Adam Smith, one of the heroes in economics, referred to the obvious and simple system of natural liberty. I fear for that system, not only because today's cultural gatekeepers find it threatening, but because many young people, students at UVA, do not understand its value. I appreciate the words in the university's statement on free expression and free inquiry. Hats off to Jim Ryan for making this happen. But we know the proof of the pudding is where it's in the eating. I would feel better about the university's statement if the medical student who was dismissed because he questioned the concept of microaggression at a public lecture was welcomed back to the university with apologies and with sanctions upon those who would thwart his right to disagree with the proposition that such speech is violence. So there you have my remarks. There are those who will dismiss what I've said as the grumbles of an old white male who, if that weren't bad enough, is a Christian to boot. And sadly, in today's woke culture, such a characterization is effective. It is effective in dismissing a person's view, even though to dismiss my views because I'm a white male is itself racist in form and substance. But I don't offer these remarks as the grumbles of an old white male. I make them as someone whose life has been marked over and over again by grace, unmerited favor. And part of that grace is being a faculty at Mr. Jefferson University during all these years that the good Lord has given me. I consider being a professor a calling, and it's a calling for which I'm thankful to God, and I'm also thankful to the members of a hiring committee in the Department of Economics who years ago took a chance on me, one I didn't deserve, and still don't. Bottom line, it's all about grace. And I offer these remarks against the chance they'll be helpful or encouraging to those who want to maintain and protect UVA as a place where, as Mr. Jefferson put it, errors of opinion may be tolerated, where reason is left free to combat it. Thank you for being my audience this evening. Go Who's.